Jake Henderson's peaceful mountain retreat was shattered when HOA President Karen Whitmore stormed into his cabin uninvited, threatening his sanctuary and ignoring all boundaries. Known for her obsession with control, Karen's arrogance and dismissive smirk pushed Jake to the edge while his loyal dogs barked warnings she refused to heed. But armed with security cameras and a call to the sheriff, Jake turned the tables, exposing her trespass and reclaiming his home. Just wait until you see how Karen's power crumbled in the face of law, loyalty, and courage, and why justice ultimately prevailed. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Jake Henderson leaned back in his weathered rocking chair on the porch of his secluded cabin. The kind of place most people only saw in postcards. The scent of pine hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of his freshly brewed coffee. Jake took a long sip, savoring the warmth against the chill of the early autumn air. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, he felt the rare luxury of peace, the kind that settled in your chest and made the world seem manageable, even beautiful. Max, his golden retriever, bounded across the yard, ears flapping, while Bella, the energetic border collie, darted back and forth like a streak of black and white lightning. They played together in perfect harmony, chasing leaves as they spiraled to the ground, the sound of their joyous barks echoing swiftly through the trees. Jake smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for these companions who always made him feel less alone even in the isolation of the mountains. And then it happened. A sharp, insistent banging shattered the tranquility. It came from the front door, an abrupt, jarring noise that didn't belong to the rhythm of the morning. Jake's heart jumped. He glanced at the yard, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor's cheerful wave. But the sound repeated, louder this time, and the hair on his neck stood on end. Something about it didn't feel right. Before he could even rise from the chair, the door swung open with a force that seemed almost deliberate. And there she was, Karen Whitmore, the notorious HOA president, from the valley below, stood framed in the doorway, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed with that unmistakable gleam of authority that always made him tense. Her heels clicked sharply against the wooden floor as she stepped inside the threshold without so much as a greeting. Jake's stomach twisted with disbelief and fury. Karen had always been obsessed with control, rules, boundaries, codes of conduct, but this was a new level. She wasn't here to talk, to check, or even to ask politely. She had crossed the line, barging into his private sanctuary as though his life and his choices were a spectacle for her scrutiny. "Jake, this property is in violation," she barked, voice sharp enough to cut through the calm morning air. She waved the clipboard like a weapon, pointing at the cabin as if the building itself had committed a crime. Her hair, always perfectly styled, seemed almost to glow in the sunlight, making her look every bit the self-important figure she had always been. Jake's blood boiled. The audacity of her behavior made his hands clench, though he forced himself to stay rooted to the porch, unwilling to let her see just how rattled he was. He had dealt with Karen's overreach before, letters, phone calls, minor disputes, but she had never done this. Never. No one barged into his cabin. This place was his retreat, his fortress against the stress of work, the noise of the world, the endless rules of society, and here she was invading it like she owned the place. Max and Bella had picked up on the tension immediately. Max stood in front of Jake, low growl rumbling in his throat, while Bella circled Karen with the precision of a seasoned protector, ears perked, tail stiff. Their instincts were clear: danger, intrusion, defend, and Karen seemed oblivious or perhaps deliberately dismissive of the silent warning the dogs offered. Jake took a measured breath, trying to steady himself. He could feel anger rising like a tide, warm and undeniable, and he knew that if he let it loose unchecked, it could boil over in a way he might regret. But the injustice of the moment, the sheer blatant disrespect for his autonomy was suffocating. He felt a surge of disbelief that someone could be so focused on rules, on control, that they would abandon basic courtesy, common sense, and decency entirely. She stood there, clipboard raised, her expression a mixture of triumph and irritation, as if she had discovered some hidden crime and was now ready to punish him for it. Jake's mind raced through the possibilities. How had she found him? How could she justify this intrusion? The questions only fanned the flames of his fury, making the world around him shrink to the immediate pressing need to reclaim his space, his dignity, and his peace. This was more than a confrontation. This was a declaration. Karen Whitmore had overstepped, and Jake Henderson would not allow it, not in his cabin, not with Max and Bella at his side. The morning that had begun with calm and coffee had transformed into the opening salvo of a battle he hadn't asked for, but one he was more than ready to face. Max and Bella didn't hesitate. The moment Karen stepped further onto the porch, their hackles rose, and the calm morning dissolved into a tense symphony of barks and low growls. Max planted himself firmly in front of Jake, his golden fur bristling, eyes sharp and unwavering. Bella moved with the grace and precision of a sentinel, circling Karen as though mapping her every move, ready to intercept any misstep. Every instinct in the dog screamed intrusion, threat, defend, yet Karen Whitmore seemed completely unconcerned. She brushed past their warnings with a dismissive flick of her perfectly manicured hand, ignoring the teeth-baring protests. Her heels clicked on the wooden porch as she advanced with a confidence that left no room for negotiation. It was as if the universe had tilted and she had been granted license to trespass. Jake's stomach twisted. The anger that had simmered moments ago now sank deeper into his chest, settling into a heavy, uncomfortable ache. How can someone be so blind? He muttered under his breath, the words almost lost beneath the chorus of growls and barks. His voice carried an edge of despair, sharp and hollow. He had spent years building this life, carving out a refuge far from prying eyes and controlling personalities. Yet here she was, trampling through the very peace he had fought to maintain. The cabin, the mountains, even the crisp autumn air, all of it felt suddenly violated like a fragile bubble that had been pierced. Jake stepped forward, raising a hand in what he hoped was a calming gesture, though he knew it might be futile. "Karen, this property meets all HOA requirements. You cannot just barge in here," he said, striving for composure. His voice wavered only slightly, betraying the helplessness he felt. He tried to meet her gaze, hoping to reach some shred of reason, some acknowledgement of the intrusion's absurdity, but Karen didn't flinch. Her lips curled into a smug smirk, a quiet, self-satisfied expression that made Jake's chest tighten. She waved the clipboard as if it were a shield against common sense. "Jake, I don't care what you say," she said, tone clipped and final. "There are violations here, and I am within my rights to check. Personally." Her words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just the audacity. It was the denial of reality, the sheer disregard for personal boundaries. Every bark from Max, every cautious circle of Bella, seemed to only amuse her, fueling the sense of injustice pressing against Jake's ribs. He felt trapped, caught between the fierce loyalty of his dogs and the invasive persistence of Karen's intrusion. The dogs sensed his unease and stayed vigilant, their growls intensifying. Yet Jake could see the strain in their eyes as well. They were protective, yes, but they looked to him for guidance, for reassurance. And he felt utterly powerless to provide it. This wasn't a normal confrontation. This was a test of patience, a trial of boundaries, a battle fought with nerves and principles rather than fists. A wave of frustration rolled over him, sharp and exhausting. He tried again, choosing his words with care. "You can't do this. You need permission, and even then you cannot." Karen cut him off with a sharp laugh, the kind that made his chest tighten with disbelief. "Permission?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "I don't need permission to enforce the rules, Jake." "You think a little cabin in the woods exempts you?" The injustice of it all pressed down on him like a weight. For the first time in years, Jake doubted whether defending himself was even possible without escalation. Each attempt at reason, each reminder of legality fell on deaf ears. The helplessness was suffocating, gnawing at the edges of his composure. He wanted to retreat, to give up, to let her have this intrusion and preserve what little peace remained. But every instinct, every beat of his heart told him he could not. Max shifted closer, nuzzling Jake's leg with quiet concern while Bella barked once more, a sharp, insistent warning. The dog's loyalty anchored him, reminding him of what was worth protecting. And yet the sting of powerlessness lingered, gnawing at him like an invisible thorn. The cabin, his sanctuary, his hard-earned escape from a world of rules and control was under siege, and Jake Henderson had never felt more alone, even with Max and Bella at his side. The morning that had begun with sunlight, coffee, and the serene rhythm of nature had transformed into a crucible of frustration, helplessness, and sinking despair. The injustice wasn't just external, it seeped into every corner of his mind, forcing him to confront the bitter reality that standing up to Karen Whitmore might come with costs he wasn't ready to measure. Yet the fire of resistance, though faint, had begun to flicker somewhere deep inside. For a long moment, Jake just stood there, chest tight and heart racing, trying to measure the impossible. Karen Whitmore had invaded his sanctuary, disregarded every polite warning, and dismissed every appeal to reason. The dog's growls and alert postures kept him grounded, their instincts a mirror of his own rising tension. And then, like a sudden flash in the clouds, a spark of defiance ignited within him. Jake's mind raced back to the small, almost forgotten news article he had read months ago. Karen's obsession with controlling her neighbors wasn't just gossip. It had made local headlines. Stories of fines, disputes, and invasive inspections were all tied to her name. She was relentless, no doubt, but predictable in her overreach. And that predictability gave Jake an unexpected sense of hope. If he had prepared for the possibility of someone like her, then maybe he could finally turn the tables. That's when he remembered the security cameras he had installed just a few weeks ago. A practical precaution meant to watch over the cabin during his frequent hiking trips now became his secret weapon. Each camera angle covered the porch, the driveway, even the thin stretch of forest where the property line ended. He knew without doubt that Karen's intrusion had been caught from every angle, every footstep, every aggressive gesture, every dismissive wave of her clipboard. It was all recorded. Jake reached for his phone, fingers shaking slightly, but with a renewed determination. He dialed the local sheriff's office, explaining the situation calmly, despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The line crackled briefly before a voice answered, steady and authoritative. "Jake, if she entered your property without permission, that's considered trespassing. You're within your rights to ask her to leave and to document everything. Don't engage in any physical confrontation, but know that her behavior is illegal," the sheriff assured him. Hearing those words felt like a release. The heaviness in his chest shifted slightly, replaced by a warming thread of hope. Karen could no longer act with impunity, not in front of cameras, not when the law supported him. For the first time since she had stepped onto his porch, Jake felt a sense of possibility. Meanwhile, Max and Bella had already begun their subtle but firm maneuver. Max advanced a few steps, not aggressively but with undeniable authority, positioning himself between Karen and Jake. Bella mirrored his movements, a circle of protective presence, her sharp gaze tracking every twitch of Karen's body. She barked once, short and controlled, enough to make Karen stumble backward, her heels clicking against the wooden boards in a staccato rhythm of surprise. Karen had underestimated both the dog's and Jake's foresight. She hadn't accounted for the cameras silently observing, nor the unwavering loyalty of two creatures determined to defend their home. Her previous confidence wavered for the first time. Her smirk faltered. The clipboard she had wielded like a badge of power now seemed almost comically inadequate in her hands. Jake took a steadying breath, watching as Karen's steps slowed. For the first time, she hesitated, scanning the yard, scanning the cameras, scanning the determined eyes of Max and Bella. The HOA tyrant, so confident in her authority, so accustomed to bending others to her will, was suddenly confronting consequences she had never anticipated. And as Jake observed her faltering, a rush of hope surged through him, warming the earlier frustration and exhaustion. He could see it in the way Karen's shoulders stiffened, in the slight backward shuffle of her feet. She was no longer in control. The dynamic had shifted, the imbalance corrected, and Jake felt a quiet satisfaction in the recognition that preparation, foresight, and the loyalty of his dogs had made this possible. For the first time that morning, the cabin felt like his again. The air, though still charged with tension, no longer suffocated him. He allowed himself a small smile as he watched Max and Bella maintain their careful watch, their tails held high, eyes bright and alert. They had not only protected him physically, they had reminded him of what he was defending, why it mattered, and that even in the face of relentless intrusion, hope could take root. Jake's heartbeat slowed, steadied, and with it, his sense of purpose returned. He knew the confrontation was far from over. But for the first time since Karen had appeared, he believed the situation could be resolved. And that belief, fragile but potent, carried him through the remainder of the morning, preparing him for the next phase of this battle. Reclaiming his peace and standing firmly for the boundaries he had fought so hard to create. The tension in the cabin had been building for hours, a thick, invisible weight pressing against every wall, every corner. Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed guardian of rules and regulations, had finally met resistance she hadn't anticipated, and now, with the sound of approaching sirens cutting through the morning calm, Jake felt a quiet certainty settle over him. The confrontation was reaching its end. When the sheriff stepped onto the porch, authoritative and calm, the shift in the room was immediate. Karen froze, her clipboard trembling slightly in her hands, eyes darting from Jake to the cameras, then back to the uniformed figure who now assessed the situation with measured scrutiny. Her earlier arrogance faltered under the scrutiny of law, her confident stance shrinking into something almost timid. The sheriff spoke clearly, firmly, without a trace of bias. "Ma'am, you entered this property without permission. That's considered trespassing. You need to leave immediately and refrain from entering again." His tone left no room for argument, no loophole for her habitual manipulation. Karen's face flushed. She tried to compose herself, to maintain her position of authority, but the evidence of the security cameras was irrefutable. Every step she had taken, every dismissive gesture, every ignoring of the dog's warnings. It was all there, documented, undeniable. She couldn't lecture, intimidate, or threaten. The power she had wielded in the valley below, the weight of her reputation, the smug confidence that had unnerved neighbors for years. All of it seemed to evaporate in the face of law and loyalty. Jake watched, heart still pounding as Karen hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, clearly struggling to maintain a facade of control. Max stood alert but calm, tail wagging slightly as though acknowledging that the immediate threat had passed. Bella nudged Jake's hand gently, a small but potent reminder of their shared triumph. It wasn't just a physical defense, it was the culmination of vigilance, preparation, and steadfast courage. Finally, Karen turned and walked down the porch steps, her heels clicking in a rhythm that seemed less confident than before. With each step away, Jake felt the release of tension, the slow unwinding of fear and frustration. The injustice that had invaded his morning, that had threatened his sanctuary, was met with accountability. Relief mingled with vindication, a heady combination that filled his chest and steadied his racing thoughts. Jake stepped back onto the porch, inhaling deeply, letting the crisp mountain air fill his lungs. He looked around at the quiet yard, at the scattered leaves and the gentle sway of the tree, and finally it felt like home again. The cabin was his, unviolated, serene once more. The injustice had been confronted with courage. The pain had been endured and the balance restored. He glanced at Max, who wagged his tail with a quiet pride, and at Bella, who nudged his leg once more, tail sweeping in contentment. These two companions had not only protected him physically, they had reinforced his confidence, reminded him of his own resilience, and underscored the importance of loyalty and vigilance. Jake realized in a quiet, profound way that boundaries, courage, and loyalty weren't just abstract concepts. They were forces, tangible and formidable, capable of defending everything that mattered most. Sitting back in his rocking chair, Jake lifted his coffee once again, savoring the warmth and aroma, the way it anchored him in the moment. The morning sunlight broke through the trees, casting a golden glow across the cabin porch, highlighting the subtle movement of leaves, the shimmer of dew, and the unwavering presence of Max and Bella. There was peace here again, fragile yet undeniable, earned through steadfastness and forethought. He smiled, a slow, contented expression that reflected not just relief, but a deeper sense of empowerment. Life could still be beautiful, he realized, as long as he remained vigilant, prepared, and willing to defend what mattered. The mountains, the cabin, the loyal dogs, and the sanctuary he had fought to protect, they were worth every moment of tension, every pang of fear, every measure of courage. Jake took a final sip of coffee, leaning back as the wind stirred the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The morning had been a trial, yes, but one that left him stronger, more confident, more attuned to the importance of defending peace and autonomy. He let himself bask in that realization, letting it sink deep into his bones. Today had been more than a victory over intrusion. It had been a reminder of the strength inherent in vigilance, preparation, and loyalty. and for the first time in hours, Jake Henderson felt fully at ease. The cabin was his. The dogs were by his side, and the world, for all its chaos and audacity, had reminded him that courage and careful planning could restore justice and protect what mattered most.